After many years of research by numerous scholars, including myself, we know now that Sumerian literature consists primarily of epics, myths, hymns, laments.
Samuel Noah Kramer was the world's top expert on the Sumerians, our planet's first civilization. He decoded their ancient clay tablets for 50 years. But in his final days, he hinted at a truth so massive it could rewrite human history. We are going to reveal that truth. It's not about gods from the sky or lost technology. It's about the Sumerians discovering a code to program reality itself. Kramer believed this ancient operating system is still running our world, and you won't believe how deep the rabbit hole goes. More than just history. One phrase in particular haunted Kramer: to raise the pure mountain and bind heaven and earth. This exact line appeared in temple songs to the gods, but it also appeared in construction records for ziggurats. Think about that. Why would a profoundly spiritual line about uniting heaven and earth appear in a simple builder's ledger? It made absolutely no sense. That is, until Kramer realized it wasn't a coincidence. These sentences that wouldn't let go weren't random. They were intentional repetitions. They were formulas woven across every single form of writing, from the most sacred to the most administrative. You see, to the Sumerians, there was no separation between religion and record-keeping. Every grain counted, every tax paid, every offering made, all of it was tied to the same cosmic rhythm. By embedding divine language into daily transactions, the Sumerians ensured that every act of governance reinforced belief. They weren't just documenting their civilization, they were synchronizing it. Writing, Kramer realized, wasn't a neutral tool. It was an operating system, and once he saw that, he could no longer look at their world or ours the same way. This was the first breadcrumb, the first clue that led him to a realization that would change everything. The Sumerians weren't just smart, they were systematic engineers of thought. But this system wasn't just on paper, because the next connection he found wasn't written on clay at all. It was built into stone. He found the code wasn't just written down, it was standing right in front of him. The ruins of the ziggurat at Ur, and Kramer finally saw what the tablets had been hinting at. The massive structure wasn't just a temple, it was a three-dimensional text. Every level, every step, every alignment mirrored the patterns of language carved into Sumerian tablets. The ziggurat wasn't built randomly. It followed the same ratios, the same sacred numbers, 3, 7, 12, 60, that governed their myths and rituals. These weren't just arbitrary numbers, they were the math of the gods. To climb it was to ascend through layers of meaning, the earthly, the celestial, the divine. Even the construction records used the same verbs as their hymns: to purify, to bind, to ascend. The builders were reciting theology through architecture. Kramer began calling the ziggurat a living sentence, a monument you could walk through, one that translated belief into geometry. The structure itself was a feedback loop, turning faith into form, and form back into faith. Every single brick carried the same linguistic rhythm as the hymns that consecrated it. Even the king's role, as the stair between gods and men, was written into the temple's design. Kramer realized the Sumerians had fused religion, politics, and construction into one self-reinforcing system. To live in a Sumerian city was to inhabit language itself. The walls spoke, the terraces sang, and the rituals ensured everyone remained part of the same cosmic grammar. It was then that Kramer began to suspect something even darker. The architects of this system weren't the kings or priests. They were the scribes, the quiet ones in the background, pressing wedges into clay. And he believed they understood exactly what they were doing. The real rulers of Sumer weren't kings. They were the men holding the stylus. The men behind the curtain. Kramer's final revelation was chilling. He came to see the scribes as the hidden architects of reality, the first true engineers of civilization. Their control of cuneiform gave them control of thought itself. Because in Sumer, to write something was to make it real. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe inscribed that a king was chosen by the gods, then that king was the king. If a scribe That statement didn't just describe power, it created it. The written word carried divine authority. Over time, the scribes blurred every line between myth and record, religion and law, truth and decree. They could shape collective belief without anyone realizing it. Kramer called this the Sumerian Code, a self-replicating algorithm embedded in language, architecture, and ritual. The ziggurat, the temple, the grain list, all followed the same logic. The system didn't need armies to enforce control. It only needed symbols everyone agreed to obey. Kramer's final note was stark. To rule the mind, one must only rule the symbols. That was the secret the Sumerians discovered. The first algorithm for belief, the first software for civilization. And if Kramer was right, that code never truly perished. It evolved. It became the foundation of our laws, our institutions, our bureaucracies. He believed we are still speaking their language, still thinking their thoughts. Because once a civilization learns to encode reality into words, the only question left is, who's holding the stylus? Now, when Kramer turned his attention from language to structure, he realized something shocking. The Sumerians had built their worldview into the very fabric of their cities. The ziggurat wasn't an isolated temple. It was part of a vast network of sacred geometry that extended across the city. Streets aligned with celestial paths, courtyards mirrored constellations, and every measurement echoed their mythic proportions. The more Kramer studied, the clearer it became. Sumerian architecture wasn't functional, it was linguistic. Each brick, each angle was a syllable in a grand physical sentence designed to express divine order. A ziggurat didn't just point toward the heavens, it spoke to them. Kramer realized that when priests ascended those terraces, they weren't simply performing ritual. They were reading the city itself, line by line, level by level, decoding a message written in earth and sky. He compared ziggurats to stone computers, processing human devotion through geometry and repetition. The building wasn't symbolic, it was the symbol. Each festival, each reconstruction recompiled the program. It was this realization that led him to a deeper insight. Sumerian architecture and writing were the same system expressed in two dimensions, one on clay, the other in stone. To destroy a city was to erase text. To rebuild it was to rewrite belief. For Kramer, this meant the Sumerians had discovered something profound. Physical space could be a medium of language, and belief could be engineered through structure. But who designed this system? Who maintained it? The answer, Kramer would discover, lay in the hands of those who never ruled but always wrote. The scribes. And what he found about them would shake the foundation of historical understanding. The deeper Kramer studied the archives, the more he realized that the real power in Sumer wasn't divine. It was literate. The scribes were the unseen governors of reality. Every decree, every transaction, every prayer passed through their stylus before it reached clay. They didn't just write the words, they decided which words mattered. To most, they were servants of temple and throne. In truth, they were both. Kramer described them as the neural network of civilization, processing every thought, every order, every belief into stable form. What stunned him was how they trained. In the tablet schools, young apprentices copied not only math and grammar, but hymns, omens, and proverbs. In doing so, they learned to blend practicality and spirituality until the two became indistinguishable. A word could mean God or star. A symbol could mark grain or blessing. This semantic overlap wasn't a flaw, it was design. It allowed the scribes to encode theology inside taxation, worship inside accounting. Kramer wrote that every scribe was both statistician and priest, translating power into permanence. The civilization's kings came and went, but the scribal code endured. Even after invasions, floods, and dynastic collapse, the same formulas appeared in new hands, under new empires. The code had outlived its creators. That's when Kramer began to suspect the unthinkable, that Sumer's scribes had created the first self-replicating system of thought. It didn't need prophets or armies. It needed only clay, repetition, and obedience to form. They had written a civilization that could perpetuate itself. The code's real secret wasn't in the words, it was in the math. The illusion machine. Sumer's mathematics fascinated Kramer because it refused to stay within the realm of utility. It was beautiful, deliberate, and symbolic. Numbers like 3, 7, 12, and 60 appeared so consistently across myths, rituals, and records that they couldn't be coincidences. To us, they're just numbers. To the Sumerians, they were laws of harmony. Kramer noticed that temple offerings followed the same numerical patterns as lunar cycles, trade exchanges, and even the dimensions of ziggurats. Every calculation reflected cosmic order. 3 symbolized divine triads. 7 represented completeness. 12 governed the heavens. 60 was perfection, the base of their entire numerical system. What startled Kramer was how these numbers organized both religion and bureaucracy. Workers were paid in cycles of 60. Sacrifices were scheduled in 7s. The architecture of temples adhered to 12s. This wasn't mathematics. It was a ritual in disguise. The Sumerians had weaponized numeracy to align their society with the universe. He called it ritual mathematics, a practice where counting was praying and measuring was obeying. The deeper Kramer delved, the clearer it became that the Sumerians weren't quantifying reality. They were synchronizing it. Each record of grain, each tally of workers reinforced the illusion that the cosmic and the civic were one. Even their timekeeping, the 60-minute hour, the 12-month year, was a continuation of their sacred arithmetic. We still live inside it. Kramer realized this mathematical framework wasn't just for efficiency. It was the scaffolding of belief. It encoded obedience as order, turning everyday calculation into a ritual of submission to divine proportion. By the time his health began to fail, Kramer had mapped the system that haunted him. He saw it as the first algorithm, an interconnected web of language, number, and form that replicated ideology across generations. The Sumerian Code wasn't a cipher to decode, it was a cultural operating system. Each component, the tablet, the temple, the ritual, executed a part of the program. Language imposed structure. Structure reflected divinity. Divinity justified hierarchy. The code was self-correcting. If one piece collapsed, the others rewrote it. Kramer realized that the Sumerians had discovered how to automate belief. Every myth, every decree, every transaction was part of a feedback loop. The text affirmed the structure. The structure embodied the text. When he described it to colleagues, they dismissed it as a metaphor. But in his notebooks, he was more direct. The code did not describe order. It produced it. He saw how phrases, numbers, and rituals formed interlocking circuits of meaning. Even centuries later, the system endured through Babylon, Assyria, and beyond. Rewritten in new languages, but preserving the same logic. To him, it was the prototype for every ideology that followed, from organized religion to centralized government. A civilization that had learned to run itself through syntax. Kramer's final realization was terrifyingly simple. The Sumerians had built the first form of artificial order, one that ran on language instead of electricity. And as he lay passing, he wondered whether we had ever truly shut it down, or if we're still executing their program. One word, one law, one symbol at a time. Kramer's final notes were not a history lesson. They were a warning. Who is writing our reality? By the end of his career, Samuel Noah Kramer no longer saw writing as a record of civilization. He saw it as its engine. The clay tablets weren't passive archives. They were active circuits, shaping the minds that read them and the worlds built around them. Every line pressed into clay was an act of engineering, not of machines, but of meaning. Kramer began calling it reality inscription, the process through which writing doesn't just describe existence, it creates it. He often told students that the greatest lie of literacy was neutrality. Modern historians treated Sumerian cuneiform as a primitive alphabet, a step on the road to better writing systems. But Kramer saw it differently. To him, cuneiform wasn't a tool for communication. It was a control mechanism. It shaped how people perceived time, hierarchy, and even morality. Once an idea was etched into clay, it solidified into law, faith, or memory. It became irreversible. The Sumerians, he believed, understood this power instinctively. They didn't write about gods. They wrote the gods into being. Each sign, each wedge was a piece of ritual machinery. When they recorded that a king had been chosen by the gods, it wasn't a report. It was an activation. The act of writing made it so. Kramer realized that writing didn't merely mirror reality. It was the framework through which reality was stabilized. He began comparing cuneiform to programming code. Just as modern software defines what a computer can and cannot do, cuneiform defined what a society could imagine as true. Words were commands. Repetition was execution. Each tablet was a subroutine of belief. Before I die, please listen. Those words appeared again and again in Kramer's final notebooks. He wasn't writing to students anymore. He was writing to whoever would still read. What followed wasn't a confession of guilt, but of knowledge. The Sumerians had discovered that the key to controlling a society wasn't force, it was narrative repetition. The more a phrase appeared, the truer it became. Their tablets didn't just chronicle obedience, they generated it. In his private notes, Kramer wrote, "The language executes itself. The human is only the stylus." If language programs reality, who's writing the code for your mind? Let us know below. Like and subscribe for more truths they don't want you to know.